Medical science often involves the use of cadavers. These are dead bodies that are donated to a scientific institution for research purposes. Typically, the person will fill out paperwork while they're still alive, formalizing their desire to have their body donated to science after they pass away. The most common way that a cadaver is used is to study anatomy. A wide variety of medical doctors, surgeons, and pretty much every medical student will analyze and dissect cadavers as part of their education, or as part of their formal research. A body that's been killed by a disease can be used to study the progression and the effects of the disease. A body killed by a bullet, or some other kind of physical trauma, can be used to study the effects of mechanical damage on the body. Intact body parts can be donated, like organs, corneas, and skin grafts. A very fascinating case example that I read a few months ago was about a lady who toured a high-tech cadaver dissection lab. The lady was very enthusiastic and very interested as the researchers explained how they would freeze her corpse and then slice it into hundreds of paper-thin sheets, and then they would photograph each sheet to upload it into a computer program which will compile all of the photos to develop an extremely detailed, three-dimensional recreation of the human body. The woman was blown away by the science, and she was really excited to donate her body to further their research. The bodies exhibit is another way that cadavers can be used. These bodies have been partially dissected and then preserved, positioned, and mounted in display cases. If you walk through the bodies exhibit, you'll see many dozens of cadavers in various stages of dissection, with their veins and bones and musculature all visible for the curious patron to look at and study. It's an unsettling, unusual, but extremely fascinating exhibit. All of this cadaver stuff, particularly the medical research, is what people generally expect will happen when they donate their bodies to science. They expect that their body will be handled with dignity, and the education and research opportunities their body provides will help advance the medical community's understanding of the human body. And in the vast majority of cases, this is exactly what happens, and the medical community is very open and very ethical about the whole process. But sometimes, things can take a dark turn. This brings me to today's news. Last week, it became public knowledge that the Biological Resource Center in Phoenix, Arizona, was being sued by 33 people who claimed that their loved ones' bodies had been acquired through false statements and then misused and mishandled. The Biological Resource Center is no longer open. It shut its doors and closed down in 2014 after numerous scandals eventually led to police involvement. Above board, the BRC claimed to pick up the cadaver bodies from the family at no charge, and then they would use the bodies for scientific research. They said that they would even do free cremations when everything was done. That's what the company said, at least. But in reality, they were selling bodies and body parts to various middlemen and private buyers of dubious scientific credentials for a profit. And now they're being charged in a multi-state investigation for the illegal trafficking and sale of human body parts. For example, one of the people involved in this lawsuit against the BRC, one of these people who are suing them, is Jim Stauffer. Jim's mother died at 73 of Alzheimer's, but curiously, she didn't have the gene for it. It was a strange case, and her doctors discussed studying her brain after she passed away, in the hopes that it might give them some insight into the development of Alzheimer's so that they could help other people. That's the whole point of all of this cadaver research. But unfortunately, when Mr. Stauffer's mother died, for some reason the neurologists were unable to accept her body. So Mr. Stauffer had to look around and try to find a respectable institution where he could donate her body to science. And unfortunately for him, he was not aware of the BRC's, let's just call it, business practices. Years later, years after he donated his mother's body, Mr. Stauffer learned that the BRC sold his mother's body to the military for blast testing. her corpse was put in a military vehicle and driven over an IED. This is despite the fact that when Mr. Stauffer was filling out the paperwork for handing over his mother's body, he specifically requested no testing involving explosions. He would later be quoted as saying that he couldn't even look at a picture of his mother anymore without, in the back of his mind, knowing that her corpse had been blown up by an IED. This is just one example of many of the Biological Resource Center's abuses and crimes. When you dig into the information in the lawsuit against the BRC, it's really just jaw-dropping. Just reading this stuff, it boggled my mind. I knew I had to make a news segment about this because, seriously, this is some crazy shit. So apparently, when they were selling body parts for profit, way back in 2013, they had a price list. You could buy a knee for $375, which I suppose would be necessary for a knee replacement surgery. You could buy a pelvis for $400, which is a little odd, as there's no such thing as a pelvis replacement surgery. But maybe there's some other medical use that I'm just unaware of. They were also selling a whole spine for $950. This is kind of creepy, but I suppose there's some medical or educational value in acquiring a spine. Maybe you need some segment of spine for a transplant. I don't know. This isn't all. There was other stuff. Much darker stuff with much more dubious medical or educational value. For example, you could buy a whole leg for $1,100, or just a foot for $450. If you wanted a torso and a head with no limbs attached, you could buy one for $2,400. For almost $3,000, the BRC would sell you the whole body of a boy, minus his shoulders and head. Exactly why the BRC is hanging onto bodies with the head and the upper torso removed, and what exactly the purchaser intends to do with a body with the head and upper torso removed, I have no idea. What these body parts, or partial bodies, would be used for by the people who bought them is unknown, especially considering the fact that the BRC mishandled the body parts in a way that would render them completely unsuitable for medical purposes. For example, when the FBI raided the Biological Resource Center, they found body parts like arms and legs stacked up with no identification or no cleanliness measures. The arms and legs weren't being kept in neat little labeled boxes like you might expect them to be. They weren't even wrapped up in sterile film. Instead, they were just stacked naked and unlabeled in disorganized piles. According to FBI and police descriptions, inside the BRC's facilities, there were buckets filled with arms, buckets filled with legs, and buckets filled with severed heads. There were giant industrial freezers stuffed with body parts, like freezers full of male torsos with the legs and the genitals removed, and freezers full of male genitals. And again, none of them had any identification. Unless a loved one came by and recognized a mole on their loved one's severed head or a tattoo on their severed arm, there was no way to tell whose body part was whose. Any relevant information on blood type, diseases, bone integrity, vascular health, cancer, drug use, it was all gone. Now you might think that this is just really, really bad record keeping and really bad storage procedures. But it goes beyond this, into the downright twisted and macabre. The FBI also found body parts that had been sewn together, seemingly for no purpose other than some temporary entertainment for BRC's workers. The most gratuitous example of this was a small female head, which had been sewn onto a large, limbless male torso. When describing the scene, the FBI agents name-dropped Frankenstein. So, needless to say, when all of this was found out, it was a huge scandal. The health violations and the complete failure to label the body parts were bad enough. That completely invalidated any potential medical value that the cadavers could have had. But the ethical violations here, of the family's trust, of the dignity of the dead, That's where this case really turns my stomach. Selling body parts is one thing, and that's bad enough, but playing with the bodies, sewing them together like some kind of wannabe human centipede surgeon? No, that's completely disgusting. The BRC has been shut down, and the lawsuit is moving forward. If you wonder how this can even happen in the first place, it's because Arizona, where all of this occurred, has little to no regulations on the body parts industry. In response to this case, the Arizona legislature dragged its feet to pass a law in 2017 that requires body donation companies to operate with a state license. But the law is a half measure, and it isn't even really being enforced, even today. As if this whole shit show wasn't gory and creepy enough as it is, the owner of the Biological Resource Center and the defendant in the criminal case is named Stephen Gore. You just can't make this stuff up.